We'll start the recording right now. So please make sure to visit our YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button and smash that like button and click the bell to get all our new content, because that really helps us out. So welcome to another educational and inspiring AAM workshop. This workshop is entitled Turkeys, Who Are They and Why Should We Care? Turkeys are one of the most misunderstood and mistreated birds in the world. They are hunted and factory farmed and ridiculed. They are the satirized icon of the American Thanksgiving table. Karen Davis will explain who turkeys really are as opposed to how they are portrayed by exploiters and most news media. She will show that they are intelligent and emotional birds whose natural intelligence is alive and well despite the abuses of domestication that they endure. My name is Michelle Granberg, and I'm your moderator. I'm a mentor and team member with Animal Activism Mentorship. I'm located in New Jersey, and I've been a vegan and activist for over 6 years. AAM's mission is to eradicate violence and build a culture of empathy and compassion, which ultimately results in animal liberation. We strive to build a global community of activists through our free 3-month mentorship program that pairs experienced activists with aspiring activists. Through one-on-one mentoring, we intend to generate an increased number of effective activists worldwide because we know this movement needs more activists. Additionally, we offer free workshops that train and educate our mentors, mentees, and the public on various aspects of animal rights activism. We have a podcast called the Animal Liberation Hour, and we host large-scale in-person activism events. AAM is proud to be fueled by FARM, the Farmed Animal Rights Movement, one of the oldest AR organizations in the country. So if you're interested in applying to become a mentor or a mentee, or want to get involved or to donate, please visit our website, animalactivismmentorship.com. We'll put that in the chat, and follow both AAM and FARM on social media. So that being said, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. Karen Davis, PhD, is the president and founder of United Poultry Concerns, a nonprofit organization that promotes the compassionate and respectful treatment of domestic fowl, including a sanctuary for chickens in Virginia. Inducted into the National Animal Rights Hall of Fame for outstanding contributions to animal liberation, Karen has authored a book about the turkey called In History, Myth, Ritual, and Reality. So she's got lots of wisdom to share with us today. We'll open up for Q&A after the presentation, so please hold your questions until then, okay? And now I'll turn it over to you, Karen. So go ahead when you're ready.
Oh, you're turning it over to me?
Turning it over to you now.
Oh, okay, I'm ready. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here, and it's great to have all of you. So it is my distinct pleasure to speak on behalf of turkeys. And I will give you a little bit of background of how I got involved with turkeys initially, and what led me to write the book that Michelle just mentioned, More Than a Meal. Well, of course, what I really mean is not a meal, but I called it More Than a Meal, The Turkey in History, Myth, Ritual, and Reality, which is available in PDF form on our website, on our homepage, as well as in print form. So I did not know turkeys growing up. I grew up in Altoona, Pennsylvania. My father was an avid hunter, as people in that area are. They still close schools on the first day of deer hunting season, I believe, and they raise pheasants purely for the sake of shooting them. These are basically tame pheasants who were raised for that purpose, and my father and my brothers and my uncle and all those people were all involved in that type of thing. But my father said, well, he only liked to shoot little animals, like birds, small birds, rabbits, and squirrels, because he did not like having to drag a large animal like a deer or a turkey through the woods. So therefore, I was very unfamiliar with turkeys growing up, except as Thanksgiving. And at that time growing up, I was like most people. You had a turkey for Thanksgiving and you didn't think about the turkey as such. So anyway, when I started United Poultry Concerns, or right before, really about 4 years before I started United Poultry Concerns in 1990, I was a volunteer intern at Farm Sanctuary in Avondale, Pennsylvania. At that time, they were just a very small operation, renting 25 acres on a vegetable and hay farm in the mushroom capital of the world, in case you didn't know, Avondale, Pennsylvania. And that was my introduction to actual turkeys. And at the time, they had 2 turkeys. A male and a female, and forgive me for their names are escaping me at the moment, but Doris was the female. And these were very large, very overweight turkeys. They were not the white turkeys that we see usually in factory farming scenes, but they were 2 dark colored bronze type turkeys. Milton, that was his name, Milton and Doris. Well, Milton, for example, would walk beside you when you were walking, and he was very, very interested, as was Doris, but Milton in particular was very, very attentive to people when they would visit the farm sanctuary, and also just people who, like me, were working there. So one day a man was visiting, and he and I were walking through what was then just a regular small barn up and down the aisles. And he was saying the usual thing that we often still hear: well, I don't eat red meat anymore, but I still eat chickens and turkeys. So in the meantime, we're walking and pausing and walking some more. And all of a sudden, the man looked down at his side, and he started to say something, but then he didn't. And he was looking at Milton, who was looking at him and me. And so then we walked on a little more, and the man finally said, well, I didn't know the turkeys he couldn't come up with a word. Like I said, well, I think maybe what he's trying to say is, I didn't know the turkeys could be companionable. Turkeys are very companionable. And they're very moody also. They can be very moody, but they're very companionable. And one of the things that caused them to be almost completely wiped out in this country and through South America and Central America by the beginning of the 20th century was that when the Europeans started coming in the 15th and 16th century, they would just shoot them all the time. They would shoot them out of the trees when they were roosting at night, and they would be like they would be occupying a square mile in the trees at night, roosting for the night. And various types of military troops and Theodore Roosevelt's brother and a whole lot of these guys, they, in their memoirs and their letters back home, etc., back to England or wherever, they described how these turkeys would walk up to the campfire with showing no fear or anything, or they would walk up to the homestead, or they would walk up to you. And these people thought, well, instead of like appreciating the fact that these turkeys were so friendly, they considered them just totally stupid. And so they'd say, so we shot them all. And they wrote that over and over again, that type of thing. So they came up to us, and they were so friendly that we could even take the babies and just take them away, to raise them to be either hunted or slaughtered for meat or whatever. So right away, from the very beginning, based on all the documentation, again, in the form of letters and memoirs and whatnot, the attitude of the European settlers and military troops and so on was very, very disdainful of turkeys. and unappreciative of them. And the only thing they could think to do was get out their muskets and shoot them. And Audubon was a very good example of that. John J. Audubon, all of his wonderful photographs of chickens and turkeys and so on that some of you may be aware of, well, they were all dead. He only painted them after he like shot thousands and thousands, including turkeys. In fact, in one place he wrote about how, well, I saw 4 turkeys and they were pretty close to me. And so I decided to shoot them. He said, but then I thought, well, you know, after I shot 3 out of 4, this kind of seems like murder. So I'll leave the other one. That's what he said. So anyway, when I started researching my book in like 2003, 2004, I was very influenced by the fact that the news media every year, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and all these other newspapers would always, it was a kind of foreplay to Thanksgiving Day. All of these very disdainful, very sarcastic articles and discussions of turkeys, like they were just a figure of sarcastic fun. And of course, I became interested in this question of like, why are turkeys caricatured this way? Why is it that this is the ritual leading up to Thanksgiving Day, the news media ritual and so on? Well, I became interested in all of that, and I read newspapers back then avidly, even, you know, that was kind of like when the internet was still just getting started. But meanwhile, as a result of my experience at Farm Sanctuary with Milton and Doris, I was very attracted to these birds who, as I said, I didn't really know in any personal way before. And then one day at Farm Sanctuary, there were about 20 white female turkeys who were brought in from a factory farm. How they were obtained, I don't know. But then I got to know them, and I can tell you, and many people who have met turkeys at various sanctuaries know how these turkeys will often just sit down right in front of you, and they just want you to pet and stroke them. They're very, very sensuous birds. So are chickens, by the way. They like you to pet their beaks and under their chins and, you know, their wattles and so on. And the turkeys, like when I would be cleaning up, I wrote about this in More Than a Meal, how, well, the female turkeys, these white turkeys, they reminded me of like girls in their white ball dresses, you know, like a formal or something. Just the way their white wings were spread out, because they were kind of like this, their wings spread out, and they would shiver when you petted them. And I guess it had something to do with the way they felt when they were being mated, but they certainly did like that physical contact, and they would just stay that way. I mean, you kind of had to lift them up a little bit to move them aside so that you could finish your work. But I was very drawn to them. And then after I left Farm Sanctuary, we did adopt, my husband and I. At the time, my husband was very helpful in those early years until we parted ways. But he was very helpful, and we adopted Mila and Priscilla, about whom I have written, because one of the things that interested me about Mila and Priscilla, who were both 2 white turkeys from one of those poultry farms that, like a little store, that would put these turkeys in a cage outside the store, live turkeys, to entice people to come in and either have a turkey slaughtered for them or buy one that had been slaughtered. So 2 really nice people in Maryland, I believe they purchased these 2 turkeys, the female turkeys, and they contacted me, and we were in Maryland at the time, in a little rural area in Montgomery County outside Washington, D.C., and said, well, we rescued these 2 white turkeys from this kind of store that was, they were being used as advertisement to get people to come in and have a turkey slaughtered for them, or have them slaughtered for them, and would you like to adopt them? So yeah, I said, sure, we'll adopt them. So we did adopt them, and actually the 2 people who rescued them wrote a very charming poem, as if they were talking about how they almost got to be the real turkey inside of me. Thanks to Karen Davis and United Poultry Concerns, I almost got to be who I was meant to be, but because of how I have been bred to be so heavy and all of that, I have never quite been able to fully express my nature. So anyway, it's a lovely poem, and it's right on our website in our turkey section and all of that. Well, Mila was a very gentle Pacific turkey. She was very sweet-natured and seemed to be quite happy, whereas Priscilla seemed to be an angry turkey. She would actually get into moods where her whole face would start to become purple, and her snood, that piece of flesh that hangs down in front of the turkey's face, which, by the way, in the turkey industry, they just pull that off when they're born. They just rip it right off the front of their face when they debeak them, and they just pull the snood off. So it's spelled S-N-O-O-D. So anyway, her snood would become like angry looking, and she would charge people. She would charge me, and she would charge my husband. So what really interested me when this was happening was that Mila, when she would see Priscilla start to get in one of those angry purple moods, Mila would walk between, saying goodbye to my sanctuary assistant here, she would walk between Priscilla and Priscilla's target, human target, and she would start to yelp like she was saying, Priscilla, please don't do this, please don't do this. And she would go back and forth between Priscilla, who was like angry, and us, who were like, oh my God, you know. And Mila actually succeeded in calming Priscilla down. And we saw this happen time and time again. So Mila was picking up on Priscilla's moods, and she was intentionally intervening and trying to stop an attack. And that was just so interesting to me, among other things, because we were saved from an attack, but also because you hear the turkey industry, as they do with chickens, and turkey farmers and so on. You know, they want to distance people from any kind of empathy for turkeys, or any sense that turkeys are friendly and you could love a turkey as much as your pet dog or cat or something like that, or that turkeys are intelligent. You know, they always want to dispute the ideas that turkeys are intelligent. And this attitude that turkeys are not intelligent seems to have beleaguered turkeys from the very beginning, at least, as I say, from the time the Europeans encountered them. So I love to tell the story. Well, these were two turkeys who were bred for the turkey industry. They're not wild turkeys, Mila and Priscilla. And yet there was no doubt at all that Mila understood what Priscilla was about to do and Priscilla's mood, and that she didn't just understand it, but that she took steps, literal steps, and vocalized, please don't do this, Priscilla. So I've told that story, and I tell it in my book, More Than a Meal, because I think it's just so important, among other things, not only to dispute with evidence to the contrary, the idea that wild turkeys are stupid because they, instead of running away from you, they walk up to you, and the idea that turkeys who have been bred for the turkey meat industry and wild animals, or domesticated farmed animals in general, are stupid and don't mind being in factory farms, and they're totally different from their wild relatives and so on. So anyway, I did all this reading. I even went to Plymouth Plantation, and where's that, Massachusetts? And I remember, you know, the first plantation, and I went up there specifically to go to their little library and their gift shop, to read every book I could read there about that mentioned anything about turkeys, turkeys and the Pilgrims, turkeys and with the Puritans, turkeys with the Native American Indians, and so on. And I sat there all day long from the time it opened until they closed. And I remember the two women who worked there, they said, and I came up to them with an armload of books that I was going to buy after I'd sat in that little stool reading all these books and everything that had to do with turkeys. And they said, nobody ever came into the bookshop. Hardly anybody reads any of these books. And you've been sitting here like for 10 hours. So you must have something important here that you want to know, or that you found out, hopefully. And I said, absolutely, I want to learn all about turkeys. So they said, oh, the first Thanksgiving. I said, well, yeah, but I'm more interested in the turkeys themselves, really. I'm interested in, of course, their encounters with human beings, but it's really turkeys themselves that I'm particularly interested in. And so they were like, well, we've never had anybody here like that before. So, but they were very nice. But it was just, they just thought that was amazing that, I'd sit there all day and read about, try to find everything about turkeys. And they just assumed I only wanted to know about Thanksgiving. And the first settlers and all of that. But anyway, so I did all this reading about turkeys and learned how they had been treated so badly, both verbally and literally. And again, they would just, people would just shoot them for anything, any reason at all. And so I began to compare all of that with all the reading I was doing in the Washington Post and other publications. And I said, really, this is a book I want to write because I've come to know some turkeys. Wanda and Willow were two other turkeys we adopted from Farm Sanctuary. And then we had Aubrey and we had Boris. And, they were just wonderful to be with. And Florence and Amelia. Florence lived for 7 years, even though she was a heavy white turkey, and they were just so friendly. And, one of the things about turkeys that is very interesting is that they are at home in every element, except the concentration camp situations that we keep them in. Every element, they are at home on the ground, in the sky, in the trees, and they swim. Adult turkeys swim, the turkey poults, the young turkeys, Poults, that's what young turkeys are called, the turkey poults, and they swim. And I remember reading how because these settlers and others who came particularly from Britain, but from France and Spain and so on, I mean, they would write about the turkeys in a very factual way. They would describe what the turkeys did. Again, it just didn't prevent them from shooting them. They would say, well, they did this and that, and how they would rise up to the trees and all of that kind of thing. So I really just was fascinated by how, for example, wild turkeys they love to walk. They like to walk better than run. And they spend most of their days walking, and they can walk up to 12 miles an hour. And they can fly 50 miles an hour. And when they get way up into the trees, if there's any type of signal of danger, and these memoirists would say, you don't hear anything, but all of a sudden there's a signal that is transferred amongst all these turkeys in the trees. And just like in a second, they all fly away. So they are communicating to one another things that we are not picking up with our ears or anything, but that they are transmitting to one another. So these turkeys have their senses are very, very keen. And one thing I noticed with all the turkeys that we have ever adopted was that even when they came here and they were brand new at our sanctuary, first in Maryland, and then we moved here to our sanctuaries in Virginia, in 1998, is how quickly they learn where they're to go in at night, where they are to go in at night. They would go out into the surrounding fields and poke around out there because, chickens and turkeys, they are wanderers. They like to wander around during the day. They like to get up very early, I've told people how chickens and turkeys see the sunrise about an hour before humans do because they see infrared light. So they're up very early in the morning when for us it's still pretty dark. And they're out there just roaming around and foraging for food and everything. And they're out there all day. But I saw with at our own sanctuaries how at night they want to come in. They want to come in and roost at night. Well, when we were in Maryland and here also until 2014, when we had our whole 12,000 square feet completely enclosed, predator-proof enclosed, so that the birds can sleep in the trees and so on without worry about being attacked by a hawk or an owl or a fox or a possum or some other type of predator. But they wanted to go in at night. They wanted to, and they knew exactly where to come to go to sleep at night, to roost at night. And I always felt so sorry for these turkeys who have been bred to be so heavy by the turkey meat industry, because they want to get up high at night. They want to get up, preferably high up in the trees. But like the chickens who have been bred for the chicken industry, they are so heavy that it is very hard for them to be able to lift themselves off anything much higher, particularly as they get older, than a bale of straw. But they will do that if they can. And I remember reading an article in a book of essays about the wild turkey, and how one of the essays, the writer talks about how, well, turkeys have such a desire to roost at night that even if you clip their wings, they will go to the closest branch, the lowest branch, and they will make their way up from branch to branch until they get as high up as they can get. And then I was reading about how, okay, many people don't know this, but until in the 1930s, in this country, in England, France, Spain, and elsewhere, farmers would walk, or they would hire what they call drovers, D-R-O-V-E-R-S, drovers, to walk turkeys anywhere from 50 miles to several hundred miles to the urban slaughter markets. So again, in this country, this went on until the 1930s. And these drovers explained how they would have to, they would herd these turkeys all these miles. They said, but we had to stop at night because the turkeys would just automatically just fly up into the trees. So, we had to quit for the night. They had to quit our walk. And then in the morning, they would complain and say, well, a lot of the turkeys just disappeared. They didn't come back, and keep walking to the slaughter markets. So anyway, I learned how turkey mothers are just absolutely fantastic mothers. I read a number of years ago in a letter to the editor in a Virginia magazine, in which the writer describes being in the woods one day. And she says, and I saw a mother turkey with her poults. She had 10 baby turkeys with her in the woods. And she said, all of a sudden, there was a hawk overhead. And she said, that mother turkey flew vertically straight up into the air, kind of positioned herself on her back almost, and flew at that hawk, just flew at that hawk and attacked that hawk. And she describes how the hawk flew a bit and then circled back around like the hawk was still going to go down to the ground and grab one of those turkey poults, one of those babies. And she said so quickly that mother turkey went back at that hawk and attacked the hawk again. And at that point, the hawk gave up, said, okay, I'm leaving, and flew away. Yeah, isn't that great? So, again, when you hear people say, oh, well, turkeys and chickens, they just don't know anything. They're so stupid. Again, it's just, that is stupid, because just the opposite is the case. They are so alert. So anyway, mother turkeys are super alert and caring about their babies. And baby turkeys will stay with their mothers for as long as 5 months. Baby turkeys have to learn a lot from their mothers. And, you know, so many die when they're placed in the turkey, what they call the turkey grow out houses. You know, thousands of them are put in a shed, wall to wall. They become very quickly because they're forced to grow so large in such a short amount of time. But turkeys need to learn things from their mothers, which they learn very quickly. But they, after they're incubated by the mother for about 26 days. And then the mother will actually, like chickens do, help the baby turkeys to emerge from their shells. And after about 24 hours, all of the viable turkeys will have been hatched. And hatching itself is a very complex thing for the baby turkeys to have to go and to undergo. And I tell people how, you know, chickens and turkeys and other birds, they don't just lay an egg, that forming an egg inside the body of a turkey and a chicken and other birds is a very, very complex biological activity. Very, you know, laying down layer after layer after layer of material to ensure the utmost freedom of the embryo inside from any type of pathogenic microbes penetrating into the innermost sanctum of the egg. And how very, very complex this is. And so then the turkeys are struggling out of their eggs, which also is a very complex, exhausting experience for the turkeys, the baby turkeys. But after about 24 hours, all of the turkeys, the turkeys who are going to live, because usually there are a couple of eggs where the turkey is not going to live, then the mother hen and the baby turkeys, they go off to begin learning and teaching and exploring. And again, turkeys are great explorers. They love to follow their mothers around. And I remember reading an essay in that book about the biology of the wild turkey. Again, these writers write very descriptively about turkeys. You learn a whole lot from them. It's just that their attitude is you either shoot them or clip their wings or cut off their beaks or something like that. But anyway, this writer in this big book called Biology of the Wild Turkey, he's describing how occasionally one of the baby turkeys will get interested in something when the family is on their walk and will stray off to pursue whatever it is that little baby turkey is interested in pursuing. And then at some point, he or she will look up and see that, well, the family has gone off without them. And suddenly the baby turkey is experiencing a kind of panic and starts to call in a very hoarse cluck to his mother or her mother. And the mother immediately perks up and calls back to the baby turkey. And the baby mother, meanwhile, is with all the other baby turkeys who stayed with her. And this writer describes how when the baby turkey who has kind of strayed off by him or herself hears that mother hen cluck, he or she just looks up and makes a beeline back to the family and is so relieved. And what the writer said, that we call that call of the baby turkey for the family a lost call, L-O-S-T, a lost call. And I thought, you know, I think of all these baby turkeys and these baby chickens, embryos, because long before baby chickens and turkeys are born, they are already communicating with their mother and siblings. So by the time they're hatched, they all know each other already. So when you think about baby turkeys and baby chickens in these massive incubators, in these huge hatcheries. All of their calls are lost calls, except that unlike the baby turkey in the wild, in the woods, nobody's going to answer them. Their mother turkey is not going to answer them. So they call to somebody who is the mother turkey in a breeder facility in a miserable condition, who never gets to help her baby. So that was another interesting thing that I learned about. And I thought of those lost calls as really having a very large significance when we think of these birds taken from their homes, taken from their families, and incubated in these mechanical incubators. And there's no mother hen to respond to their infant calls. Well, I think most people listening to this by now realize that turkeys are born, as are chickens, in huge mechanical incubator drawers. And these incubators are full of drawers from the top to the bottom, and in these massive hatcheries. And so the industry has it so that, I don't know if you hear my rooster out there crowing, that's Rupert. He says, I remember where I was born in a hatchery. I don't want to hear that story. I got out of there, unfortunately. I'm getting angry just hearing about it. But so the baby turkeys are born, they're hatched, and the industry has it so that the hatching is very synchronized. And the ones who are not born quickly enough, who do not hatch quickly enough, all they do is grind them up, and they call them hatchery debris. And that's DEBRIS, just hatchery debris, and scoop them up and send them to rendering plants where they end up being poultry and livestock feed and pet food. But anyway, so these turkeys are hatched, and then they are just thrown onto these metal carousels with long slides, and the turkeys go down these slides, and they now they may go to the debeaking machinery where somebody just sits there all day and just debeaks turkeys and chickens. And of course, as most people probably know who are watching this presentation, chickens, turkeys, and all birds have very, very sensitive beaks from the time they are embryos. Their beaks are full of very, very sensitive nerve endings. So when you debeak a turkey or a chicken's beak, or debill the bill of a duck, that is a very, very painful operation. It has been described by poultry scientists as comparable to phantom limb pain, that the pain lasts long after the beak that part of the beak has been severed from what remains. So the birds experience that pain in the missing limb part. So anyway, nowadays, what seems to have replaced these one person sitting in front of a debeaker and debeaking one after another, one after another, one after another, they now have these carousels where the turkeys are hooked up to this debeaking laser thing, and they're going around in this big carousel-like circle. They're hanging by their beaks from it. And these lasers, from what I understand, I have a book called Beak Trimming. That's what the industry likes to call it, debeaking. They call it beak trimming, describing this. And again, it's very informative that they talk about the pain that the birds endure. They talk about how apparently the laser is such that it doesn't just burn off the beak immediately, like with that debeaking guillotine type of operation, but that the turkey's beak remains when they are shoveled into the turkey grow out houses as baby turkeys. And only after a while I don't know, whether it's several days a week or something like that, then the beak crumbles off. I mean, there's part of the beak left because they have to eat, but the part that has been subjected to the laser beam, it crumbles off. So can you imagine how these turkeys, having had an experience like that, and now they're thrown into all, by the thousands into one of these turkey houses and trying to eat with this crumbling beak tip. And again, it isn't just the tip, because anybody who's seen turkeys who have come from a factory farm background, often quite a lot of that upper beak has been sliced off or crumbled off. So of course, this makes it very difficult for these birds to eat properly. And again, I'm speaking of chickens and ducks as well undergoing this procedure. And I mean, the poultry industry literature is just full of, the shock of being debeaked causes many to just die from the shock and the blood loss. And then because their beak is so, where the beak has been removed, is so painful that they often can't eat because eating causes too much pain. So they die of starvation because they can't eat because their beak is so full of pain. And then because the beak doesn't pick up things well anymore, because it's just kind of blunted, that also interferes with their ability to pick up food. Well, in the poultry industry, birds who are being raised for human consumption, all they ever get to eat is mash, like a powder. So with their missing beaks, they can just kind of ingest this powdery stuff. Well, I've read articles about how, among other things, birds like chickens and turkeys who are allowed to eat only a powdery mash type of thing often suffer from mouth hygiene problems, because the birds have evolved to require various types of objects of various sizes and textures, and that which they would pick up naturally when they are out foraging in the woods or in the meadow or something like that. So when they can only eat mash, which kind of sticks to the roof of their mouth and causes other problems, that they often develop mouth problems just because they are not suited to just eating nothing but mash. And of course, as far as water is concerned, anybody who's around chickens and turkeys know how much they love to drink water deeply. They like to get their wattles and everything all wet, and that's what they like. But in the industry, there's usually a plastic thing hanging from the ceiling that enables them to drink from this nipple one drop at a time. So that's all the water they can get. And of course, the reason they do that is because they want to keep the floor from getting any wetter than it's going to get already from the water, because, animals in nature, they just want to drink and the water's going to spill and all of that. So these poor turkeys, as well as the chickens and the ducks, they get only, imagine ducks, waterfowl. They're not able to have access to water for their eyes and their feathers and everything. I think about a duck without water is like horrible, and it is horrible. But anyway, turkeys hate that. And again, as I mentioned earlier, turkeys like to swim. So anyway, everything is taken away from them. And when you think about the situation that they are in, everything that makes life worth living is stripped away from them. There's nothing to do. There are no activities, there are no projects. Everything is to just be in an existential, excremental void, VOID. They're just in a void of excrement and nothingness. And of course, as turkeys get older, and the same with chickens, they need to use their beaks. Studies have been done, the number of studies that have been done over and over again, reproducing these same results over and over and over again. have shown that chickens and turkeys have an inborn need to peck. That's their nature, because they have an inborn need to peck, because in nature, that's how they get their food. They forage the ground. So they use their feet to scratch the ground and scratch up things in the ground that are nutrients for them to peck. And so if they cannot peck anything that will provide nutrition or the kinds of little pieces of stone that they need in their gizzards, which act as teeth, chickens and turkeys grind up their food in their gizzards. So that's why they will pick up bright objects. Sometimes people say, oh, they're so stupid, they'll try to eat your jewelry. That's not stupidity, it's that they have evolved to be attracted to bright objects, because in nature that might be like a little glinting piece of stone or something that they will ingest to enable them to grind up their food in their gizzards. So they need to peck. And I've told this story often, that I learned from a poultry scientist named Eldon Keenholz, who was a poultry nutrition scientist at Colorado State University, which is a big ag university, like all these land grant universities are. University of North Carolina State, University of Maryland, University of California, Colorado State. These are all land grant universities whose original purpose was agribusiness. So these kinds of experiments are done all the time in these places, and done and redone, because how many experiments can you do over, on one type of body? I mean, what can you do beyond just getting more grants, more taxpayer grants, more NIH grants, which again are taxpayer grants, to keep doing these inane and really cruel, very cruel experiments. So Eldon Keenholz, who parenthetically finally got an enlightenment about the kind of work he was doing. He had grown up on a farm in, I believe it was Missouri. And as he pointed out in a couple of articles he wrote, he said, we did these things to farm animals. We, mutilated them, and also we shot every squirrel, we looked at every wild animal as a pest. So it was just natural to shoot them. So that's what we did. So again, anybody who thinks that the family farm was this nice, lovely place, really, it wasn't. And I have a lot to say about the family farm in More Than a Meal, The Turkey in History, Myth, Ritual, and Reality, how turkeys were actually treated. And in my book, Prison Chickens, Poisoned Eggs, an inside look at the modern poultry industry, I have a lot to say and to show about what the kinds of behaviors that were just part of regular farming that evolved into what we know as factory farming. Well, anyway, so Eldon Keenholz described this one particular experiment he did with baby chickens and turkey poults, that is baby turkeys. He said, well, we wanted to see if we cut off the wings and the tails of newborn chicks and newborn turkeys, if they're not having to grow those appendages, could we save the industry, the turkey industry and the chicken industry, 75% of the cost of feeding them, something like that. So that's what they did. He said, we cut off their tails and their beaks, or their tails and their wings. Imagine cutting off their wings. And he said, it turned out that without their tails and their wings, if they fell over on their backs, which they did because they couldn't balance themselves, when they fell over on their backs, he said, they could not right themselves. They could not get back up again. So he said that was one of the things that caused him to kind of have a bit of a qualm about his profession. He said, because again, he was very clear. He said, we did all these things to animals growing up. You take it for granted. This is farming, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, we love our animals, but, this is the reality of farming. And then he described another experiment. He said that he did with a researcher from NIH. He said, we cut holes in the throats, the necks, the trachea of newborn chickens and turkeys. And we wanted to see if you feed them a kind of slurry, a slop that has all the nutrients they need in order to grow, could that save the industry the cost of feeding them? I mean, imagine, it's so stupid. You talk about stupidity. How are you going to feed all these turkeys and chickens in a real life chicken industry situation? Even if that did save feed costs. So what are you going to do? Have everyone with a tube down their throat? I don't know. But he said, anyway, but they did that experiment. They got a grant from NIH to do it. And he did it with this fellow researcher at NIH. And he said, and so we spent all this time and all this money, taxpayer money, on trying to see if we could save the industry feed costs by feeding them through a tube down their throat. And he said, after doing all that and spending all that money, well, all we discovered was that chickens and turkeys peck anyway. He said, because it's their nature to peck. So when these turkeys are in the turkey houses as babies and growing up, he said, well, they have nothing to peck at but the mash, which doesn't satisfy a bird with a beak. It's not just their beak, it's their whole self, which includes their beak. And as far as the pain of being debeaked, beak trimmed, having part of their beak laser beamed off and everything, it isn't just the beak that's experiences extreme pain, but the beak is connected to their whole face with all those nerve endings. So it's their whole face that is experiencing all of this terrible pain from this mutilation, which of course is done without any painkillers. Everybody, I think, here knows by now that no mutilations in any aspect of animal farming, and no animals ever get any painkillers for any of the mutilations, whether their tails are being docked or their ears are being cut off or whatever they're doing, debeaked, removing the snoods of turkeys, declawing them, because that's another thing that turkeys in the turkey industry have to undergo. They don't just cut part of their beaks off, they also detoe them. And of course, what that does, not surprisingly, and which you see if you have turkeys from the turkey meat industry, is that makes it more difficult for them to walk and balance themselves on the ground. I mean, turkeys are very resilient, as are chickens. They will do their best to adapt to the mutilations that have been imposed upon them. But you see these turkeys from the turkey industry, and their toes have been basically cut off. They've been what they call de-toed. So imagine a baby turkey coming into this world, having been completely deprived of the mother turkey and of the sounds of nature, which they can hear inside their egg, and from anything that they evolved to experience. And their first experience having been born is to be sent down these metal chutes and be mutilated, their beaks and their toes, and then thrown into these turkey houses. And I think I mentioned the fact that, the turkeys, baby turkeys, they are so unequipped for not having a mother hen, and so many of them die because they can't function in those situations. Well, anyway, so they're raised. Many die, but enough live long enough to grow to this huge size, totally unnatural size. And it isn't just the size of the turkeys, like with the chickens, it is the disproportion of their bodies. because in nature, chickens and turkeys do not, nature didn't evolve them to be basically a big piece of breast muscle. But that's what they're raised for in the turkey meat industry. So the turkeys and chickens have this great big breast developing, because that's why they exist, basically to be a breast. And so that that causes a disproportion inside them of their other body organs. So like body organs will be like too close together, and just all kinds of things are going on inside them, anatomically and physiologically, that again prevent them from experiencing themselves in a natural way. There's somebody inside that body for whom that body is alien, and they really are encased not only in a alien physical environment, that is the turkey house or the chicken house, shed, whatever you want to call it. Some people call it a barn, but I don't even call it a barn, because really barn sort of sounds like something romantic and old fashioned. So they're really just sheds and buildings in which they're, forced to live. But so there they are. They've got this. They're in this big shed, wall to wall, beak to beak, and then they're encased in a body that is alien to them, from which they cannot escape. And as I mentioned, they are debeaked. Well, why? Well, because they don't have anything to peck at naturally. So they're driven to peck at each other out of total frustration, because the body of the bird next to them is at least something which is soft and like, what do I want to say, has some tension to it. I mean, it's so pathetic, because they get blamed because they're pecking at each other, not only debeaked, but then blamed because they're pecking at each other. But what can they do? They don't have anything to peck at. As I mentioned, the turkey mash is just not satisfying. And they have to live second after second, minute after minute, day after day. In the case of turkeys, it is anywhere from 3 months to 6 months. So that's how long they live. They're slaughtered according to whether you want like a small oven-sized turkey or a big oven-sized turkey or a restaurant-sized turkey. That's how they're bred, and that determines when they're going to be slaughtered. So 3 months, and then the hens and the toms, they are slaughtered at different ages, at different sizes, and so forth. Everything about how they're raised is geared toward how they're going to be used. Are they going to be used for deli slices in a delicatessen, or are they going to be served as a whole turkey on a Thanksgiving Norman Rockwell type table, or whatever? So anyway, they will peck at each other because they're frustrated, and because they have to peck at something, and there's nothing else in these places except metal and plastic and mash, and the floor. Okay, so they're amongst shavings, wood shavings. Okay, so what happens with the wood shavings, the same as with the chickens, is the wood shavings quickly become filled up with excrement. And it isn't just the excrement of like a normal turkey out in nature eating a normal turkey diet, which does consist of a lot of plants, but also they'll eat small they'll eat insects. Occasionally they will consume a toad or a little mouse. So they're not vegan, and neither are chickens. They will eat a little animal if they can get hold of it. But anyway, in the turkey industry, of course, as in the chicken industry, they have nothing to grab. So, and then the other thing is dust bathing. Chickens and turkeys dust bathe. They dust bathe to clean their body. They dust bathe to keep themselves cool in very hot weather. They dust bathe to get rid of debris that can accumulate in their skin and in their feathers. And dust bathing is how they practice hygiene. So this isn't just something they do and nobody knows why. Everybody who is around these birds understands that they dust bathe as their way of practicing bodily hygiene. So they use their beaks and their claws to start making a dust bowl in the earth. And this is also a very sensuous experience for them. They love to dust bathe. As we see in nature, people love to do the things that they need to do. Turkey people and human people and all people have to like to do the things that they need to do in order to survive and thrive. So we like to eat, we like to do a lot of different things that will enable us to reproduce and so on. So one of the reasons that turkeys and chickens will peck at each other in confinement operations is because they are trying to take a dust bath. Imagine how it is for hens in battery cages. They take what they call vacuum dust baths, where they have nothing to dust bathe in, but they have to undergo those motions of dust bathing because that is built into their nature and their evolution. So the turkeys will start taking a dust bath, and they will actually start to perceive, according to researchers who have done like many dust bathing experiments, that what they're saying is that chickens and turkeys will start to actually perceive one another's feathers as like a soil substrate, earth. That their perceptions will actually undergo a kind of transformation where they see each other's feathers as something like earth, because it's something that you can pull in, and you can pull in and you can make a nest out of, you can make an earthy type of thing out of. So here again, you see the birds trying to adapt who they are and their own needs to a situation which does not provide anything for them to do naturally. Because again, for the chickens in the egg industry, all they are is an envelope or an egg carton to pump out eggs. That's all they are. The rest of
You have
them,
about 5 minutes.
okay.
So you can take
For the
Q&A.
chickens and turkeys, all they are is something to make meat out of. So they're really viewed as just a thing in process of becoming either eggs or meat. And they themselves are just considered to be kind of, the body is really, the rest of the body and the needs of the birds are just a kind of something in the way that you have to accommodate to get that breast muscle tissue and those eggs out of. That's really all they are. So meanwhile, you've got a fully developed consciousness in a bird, a consciousness that is not valued at all by those who are raising them. Their consciousness and their own self is just something that you have to kind of deal with in order to get the meat out of and the eggs out of. So I'll just quickly say that everybody should know that when these birds are sent to the slaughterhouses, and again, the slaughter of turkeys and chickens and other birds by regular farmers prior to the 1930s, when the big slaughter plants were developed. I mean, they would, you know, as I've mentioned, I think on your show before, you know, they, as farmers and so-called do-it-yourself farmers do this even now, where they take a knife up into the groove of the roof of the mouth of the birds and scramble their brains with it in order, and sometimes even go into their eye, through their eye up to their brain, to scramble their brain so they become paralyzed, fully conscious, because that will cause the feathers to come out more easily, the pores to open, so that the feathers will come out more easily after they have been scalded, many scalded alive. Well, in the modern huge chicken and turkey slaughter plants, what they use is electricity to paralyze the muscles of their feather follicles so that their feathers will come out more easily after they have been scalded, whether dead or alive. And so the turkeys are grabbed, they're hung upside down, and since they are very heavy, being hung upside down, shackled by their ankles, you might say, it is so hard on their hip joints but they're just, this is this big heavy animal hanging upside down, which is so painful to their bodies. And then they are sent through these big splashing troughs full of electrified water. And can you imagine electricity, suddenly electrified water going through your eyeballs and your eardrums and your heart and your lungs? I mean, that is total torture. Whenever I hear anybody say, well, now they're talking in the fishing industry about stunning them before they tear them apart and all this, lobsters and others, I'm saying, if it's electricity, don't call it stunning, because it is not stunning. And if you read the industry literature, you understand they're not interested in rendering these birds either pain-free or unconscious. That's not the purpose of what they call stunning. The purpose is to facilitate feather release and to fit the birds to the equipment, to the process. So after they have been subjected to this, going through this electrified water, fully conscious, and then they have their necks partially cut by these revolving blades, and then sometimes there's a backup person to finish the job, and sometimes their one leg is hanging down, and I mean, a lot of times things go wrong, even though what goes right is completely horrible. And then they hang upside down, bleeding out. They force them to stay alive so that their hearts will keep beating out the blood. And then they are thrown into skull tanks. And many chickens and turkeys, millions and millions every year in this country alone, to say nothing of all the other countries as well, are scalded alive. And as Virgil Butler described the chicken, Tyson chicken slaughter plant he worked in for years in Arkansas, he said that the chickens, referring to the chickens, he said, they struggle so much in those skull tanks that their eyeballs pop out of their heads. And he said they scream, even though they're babies, like they're screaming, and they break their bones struggling in the skull tanks. So imagine that this is called, this is considered a wholesome Thanksgiving meal. I mean, you're eating a bird who was tortured from inception to destruction. And, we just have to help people to try to understand that there is nothing wholesome about what they are putting in their mouths, that they are eating, a mouthful of misery and a taste of torture. That's what they're consuming. And it's too bad for words. I mean, you cannot exaggerate. In fact, I don't think we can even imagine what it's like for these birds, because we understand things about our own species and what our species does. But how can these birds comprehend the conditions in which we put them? Because there's nothing in their nature, in their genes, or in their evolution to make any sense of what they are being put through. So I guess it's time to say what we say for every turkey on their behalf: don't gobble me. And in fact, we're going to run a bus ad starting on the 14th for a month in Pittsburgh this year. I think I said, we're going to say, like the turkey is talking to the person. Be a do-gooder this year. Don't gobble me. Go vegan. Okay, we'll see how many people actually say, okay, turkey, I'm going to do what you say. I'm not going to gobble you this year or ever again.
That's great. Let's take a couple of questions now. Thank you, Karen. That was just amazing. Does anybody have a question for Karen? You can put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand, or you can use the hand raise icon. Give you a moment or two for any questions about turkeys. Yeah, people are sort of processing all of that information, and it is not surprising, and still yet shocking and horrifying and dumbfounding and depressing. So Erin, you have your hand up. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk, Karen. I have a question about the letter that I heard that you recently wrote to Michael Moore, the
Right.
filmmaker. I wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit about that and if you've heard back from him.
Well,
Or
first of
his team.
all, I thank you for your question. I did write him a letter and send it this past weekend to Michael Moore. And very quickly, I wrote to him because I got on an email mailing list of his that I didn't sign up for, but anyway, having to do with, current politics and the upcoming election and all of that. So at the bottom, it says, in order to comment, you have to be, I believe, a paid subscriber, which I wasn't going to become. But he said, but you can also email me directly, and I read every single email. So I just decided right then and there that I would send him a letter via his email address, which I did. And, I brought out the fact that I totally was on the same side as he is as far as progressive politics and caring for all of the people who are so mistreated by the corporations, et cetera. We're on the same page as far as all of those concerns go. But I'm very concerned about the fact that I never get a sense from you that the rest of the living world even exists as anything at all outside like the human enclosures in which we find ourselves. We seem to be, as humans, including you, as pretty much self-enclosed. And if we talk about the environment at all, or climate change or whatever, it's almost like just in an abstract sense. And it's almost as if there are no animals out there at all, just climate change or the environment. But you get a sense that this environment is just a kind of empty place where these abstract things are happening. But, I have seen you on MSNBC, and I got the sense that really you talked pretty without any sense of remorse about shooting birds when you were growing up and with your friends. And I'd just like to know, like, where is the rest of the living world in your philosophy, in your politics? Could you just respond to that, please? I said a lot more, but it's right on our homepage. You can read the letter right there. So I said I would appreciate a response from you, and I said, a meaningful response. I said, don't send me some formality, please. So of course I have not heard from them. Maybe I shouldn't say of course, but I kind of feel like he may not respond. I don't know if you read the letter, but I did encourage people, and we'll probably send out an alert, and just basically saying, you can write to him yourself, you can write to him, send a paragraph saying pretty much the same thing. Why don't you show any concern for, or interest in, or sympathy for all of the animals who are out there who are being affected by our activities, who are being affected by climate change, and in the things we do to the environment and the things we do to those animals directly that causes so much suffering. Why don't you show any interest in or care for them? So anyway, in the letter, right at the top, I include the link to Michael Moore's email address. So you can write to him directly and just say, I'm concerned about the fact that you don't show any concern for animals, and even seem to have a kind of disdain for them. Unfortunately, it seems to be an issue with so-called progressives in general, that people who are in the animal advocacy movement, I'd say by and large, probably have a progressive outlook on politics, and are concerned about people who are disenfranchised and abused in various ways. I would assume that, but I don't see any reciprocity there. We share your concerns, but you don't include any of our concerns, and you basically don't show any concern for the rest of the living world. It's like we're here. I said to somebody later, it's like so many of these people are in the studio, like on MSNBC or CNN or PBS. It's like they're in the studio. It's like the studio is kind of a metaphor and a microcosm of how human beings exist on this planet. We're in here with all our technology and our digital this and digital that, And out there, it's just like an alien world out there. We don't, it's like, it's not even real to us. We're in a studio on the earth. Does that answer your question? I hope.
Erin, did you have anything to add to that, or a question to add to that, or not?
Oh, I was really curious to hear if you heard back or not, even just a form letter. Though I know you specifically said don't bother with that, but yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Well, I was only current. I was trying to just get him to say, you know, try to say something that matters, you know, even if it's, I don't care about animals. Just say something besides just, thank you very much for, you know, the kind of letter you get from your local House of Representative person or something. You know, they write to you, like, you can write to them about anything, but they'll write back to you just a very, a letter, a generic letter. So, you know, why not sort of push them a little bit and say, I want to hear something real from you, not just a formality. But anyway.
Thank you, Erin. Great.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you.
Marcus, you're next. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question for Karen.
Yeah, hi there. Hey, so interesting and actually very depressing presentation, but you know, what's new? You know, we hear this all the time with all the other animals that are consumed by humans, and including dogs, like in South Korea. But I think the point is, and I saw you typed in something here, cognitive dissonance, which is really one of the key factors. You know, that I'm not sure if everybody on this call is vegan, but I certainly am, and I have to say that, you know, hearing this information just kind of compounds the sadness that we all feel about this. And the bigger problem is getting the people who are still eating these things to hear it, and they don't want to hear it. And as a matter of fact, that, you know, I contacted a friend today and I shared with him a little short video. Earthling Ed just came out with a short video yesterday called Milk, and it's an animated, I don't know if you've seen it already, but it kind of goes through the process of, you know, how you know, the calves are stolen away from the mothers, and then if the mother stops producing, well, there she goes to the slaughterhouse and she's done. But I sent it to this guy and he responds back, I still like my steak. And this is a problem that we face here, you know, as vegans, as activists. You know, as soon as you start putting the word out there of the reality of it, people don't want to hear it. And so, you know, your story today is depressing, and if you could just throw that into somebody's face, it's hard to imagine how they're not going to respond like, how could I keep eating this stuff? So I don't know if that's really a question as opposed to, you know, just my input on this whole situation.
Well, first of all, I think we all feel this sadness. Not only what we are putting all these animals through, needlessly, because we don't need to have the products that we extract from them in the first place, as we all know. But the response of what I want to call, I guess, the average person is, it's infuriating, really. It's sad. It's because it makes you wonder. You know, you used to hear a lot of people say, well, you know, if only slaughterhouses had glass windows or something. In other words, you know, if only people could see what really goes on behind the scenes, they wouldn't want to eat these animals anymore. They wouldn't want to eat their eggs and drink their milk and all that. But what we find out as we go along is that, of course, there are people like us who learn the truth and we stop eating animals, and we, you know, we don't want to be part of that anymore. We don't want to have that kind of relationship with other animals.
You do better when you know better.
Huh?
You do better when you know better.
Well, yeah, that's what we would hope. But unfortunately, many people are like your friend. They're like, well, yeah, I agree, it's terrible. Somebody should do something about that. It should be more humane. But meanwhile, I like my steak. So that's a kind of common refrain that all of us find out. We experience, and we find out that, well, okay, we're bringing the slaughterhouse with glass walls for you to actually peek inside and see it. And you're saying, well, I still like my chicken and my steak. I don't care, or my turkey and my eggs and my milk. So now what do you do? You know, I mean, how do you get people to care enough to want to not participate in those terrible experiences anymore, to not want to contribute to them, to not want to put money down on the counter for such horrible stuff. And here's all this marvelous food. I still am amazed how many people say, well, if we don't eat meat, what are we going to eat? Every street corner practically, even in rural areas, has some kind of supermarket, Walmart, Trader Joe's, you name it, filled with to capacity with more food than you can even imagine. And these stores are everywhere. And you're saying, what am I going to eat if I don't eat meat? I think part of it with people is
It's not logical.
I think there's a lot of recalcitrance from many points of view in many people. But one thing I think is they do not want to have to deal with eating as an issue with their friends, with their family. It's like, okay, mealtime is when I want to relax and be comfortable and forget the cares of the day and release my tensions and everything. And now you're telling me I should be vegan, and now I'm going to have to explain to people why I'm not eating hamburgers anymore and why I'm not eating chicken wings anymore. And I just don't want to go through that. I mean, people may not quite always admit that to themselves, but the social consequences of not consuming animal products is certainly a big factor, I believe, I know is a big factor in people not wanting to become vegan. They just don't want to deal with the social repercussions. It's like now mealtime is just going to be another source of tension and anxiety. And if they have a family with children, well, now the children are going to complain. They want their hot dogs and they want what everybody else is eating. So, I mean, that's a big part of it. And again, a lot of it is, we want to believe that people are really sensitive and caring, but I mean, that isn't always the case. It just isn't.
Let's take another question. Such a great conversation. John Bell, go ahead and unmute and ask your question for Karen.
Yes, number one, I was horrified, and I couldn't believe there was so much more horrors than I even knew. And to think of that there's 60 minutes or more is not enough time to discuss, to find out what the horrors are. Can't believe 60 minutes was not enough. I know, as we all know, that when we talk to people, there are people who don't want to hear it, no matter what you do. So if you, there are two ways to talk to people, and I think one way is to show the horrors, and people turn away from that because they don't want to face the reality and to have guilt. So maybe the other way is to show, like the way you started, to show the personalities of these birds, these turkeys, to get people to know, and then the more they know the personalities and they get to understand it, they become more like their dogs and cats. And who's going to eat their dog and cat? So instead of turning their eyes away from it, engage them with the personalities to get to know these animals, and then later tie in the cruelty to them. And then they could be abhorred by what they see, because now they think of them as a dog and a cat, and now they get really angry because they really understand now they have personalities and they have intelligence. And one thing I was hoping, and I know we have a lot of videos out there that show the horrors of animal agriculture, but a lot of times these videos to share to people are like very long, half an hour or an hour. And I know if I show this to anybody who's not a vegan, they don't have the patience, and even vegans may not have the patience to go through an hour of the video. But if we could bring videos have 30 seconds of personalities of a turkey, and then have a link to another video for more personalities, so they get little bites of information, And if they're interested, they're engaged, you get to see another 30 seconds and you keep going on until they get the information they need.
Well, right. I agree. Again, I mean, all of us who have been in this movement for years and even decades, I mean, we know that there is so much information available. I mean, we have a whole section of videos right on our website, including undercover investigations done by Animal Outlook and Mercy for Animals, and you know, we have so much information. Plus, all of this information about, you know, the friendliness of turkeys and chickens. And one of the good things that has happened within the last 20 years is farmed animal sanctuaries. They really are one way for people to actually experience a living chicken or turkey or sheep or goat or pig or cow. And now, even if they cannot visit a sanctuary, a farmed animal sanctuary, they can visit one online. There is so much information. And, you know, it's interesting when people say, oh, you start to tell them something about what these animals go through, and they say, oh, I don't want to know about it. Well, the thing is, that means they do know about it, because they're saying, I don't want to know what I know. Okay, now they may not know all the details, but they know there's something bad, and they're saying, I don't want to hear it. Okay, they don't want to hear what they already know is really bad. So again, we have talked, all of us in the animal advocacy movement, all of us in the farmed animal advocacy movement, in countless different situations, conferences, conference calls, Zoom calls, you name it. What is going to get people's attention? For some people, it's just seeing or learning about the horror of like a fact, you know, a battery hen complex or a turkey slaughter plant or something. And that is it for them. I mean, when I read Peter Singer's Animal Liberation, and before that I had read Tolstoy, Leo Tolstoy's description of his visits to the Moscow slaughterhouses, and just the pitifulness that he described of how even the slaughterers would say, you know, that they felt sorry for the cows, because the cows would come up to them so trustingly, and yet they had to grab them and hang them upside down and often skin them while they're still alive and all of that. And you wonder, why are we doing this? You know, Tolstoy said, why are we doing this? He became vegetarian, vegan when he was really quite old, because in those days, in the 19th century, and really well into the mid 20th century, I mean, people knew all these terrible things. They did them themselves. I mean, maybe not to the nth degree of what a factory farm does right now, but the thing is, people raised their own animals. People raised chickens and turkeys in London and in cities in their own homes. There were thousands of chickens raised in London, and other birds, geese and turkeys and ducks. They were out on the streets of London. You can hardly believe all the carriage horses and all the manure everywhere all the time, and all the chickens and pigs and turkeys running around, and all of these birds who were running free on the streets. And then in the big kitchens of the big estates, like in Jane Austen, you know, you never see these Jane Austen films actually, or the books for that matter, really show the kitchens, these huge kitchens in these big estates. And, you know, they're slaughtering birds all day long in these kitchens, the maids and the servants and people who work in these kitchens. They've got all these birds locked up in cages, and they're slaughtering them there. And another thing about turkeys that, since we bring this all up, is we hear about, you know, how calves are hung upside down and bled out slowly so that their flesh will be white and as free as of the blood as possible. Because there's this whole thing about the superiority of a white flesh and all that that goes way back. Well, that was a commonplace behavior and may still be in certain rural areas of England. You hang a turkey upside down in the kitchen of one of these big estates, and you have the scullery maid who stands there with a bucket, and the turkey is bled out. They put like a little hole under the tongue of the turkey, who is hung upside down in one of these big kitchens, and then there's the bucket underneath. And then slowly, over a period of many hours, the turkey is slowly bled out. So this is a commonplace behavior long before what we call factory farming, which really became the way of most farming in the mid 20th century. That was a way that turkeys were slaughtered, slowly bred out, and chickens, of course, too. Another thing that's commonplace going back many centuries in all countries is cramming them, force feeding them, like what is done to ducks and geese to produce foie gras. Well, that's a common practice. Cramming chickens, cramming turkeys, cramming ducks. This isn't something that's just rather isolated and for specialized markets. This is an age-old practice of force feeding, cramming, what they used to call cramming birds, and so that they'll have this nice soft flesh and have these livers that are all soft and pudding-like and all of that. Again, just to get back to the question that was just raised by John, it's just very difficult. And then I mean, another thing that has been done a lot of is going into universities and paying a student $1 if she or he will sit down and watch just a very short video of, for example, of a chick. Well, usually they'll show like as many things as they can in like a minute or 2 minutes. Now, how many of those students come out of that that booth where they've witnessed these short clips of these terrible treatments of these birds and other animals? How many of them decide they're not going to eat those animals anymore? They're not going to eat the cheese. How do you get people to stop eating cheese, for heaven's sakes? How do you get them to stop eating chicken? It just seems like it's a very difficult thing. That's all I can say. People will say, oh my God, I'm never going to eat that again. Look what Oprah Winfrey said when she learned some things years and years ago about cows. It was like she didn't even really care about the cows. What she cared about was, ooh, that's disgusting. I'm not going to eat a hamburger anymore. But I'm sure she went back to eating hamburgers. And just in the last couple of years, she has been advertising her special weight reducing, delicious so-called casseroles and whatnot. What chicken and cheese are the main ingredients, along with some vegetables. Even Ellen DeGeneres, she used to say she was vegan. And then she stopped being vegan. If she ever really was vegan, and then she started, I don't know, promoting, I forget what, animal products through some advertiser. It's just, people will say, well, they're going to be vegan, but then a lot of times the smell of some animal product being cooked or just being with a bunch of people and you're having a few drinks, and well, what are you going to do? Say, I'm not going to eat any of that? Well, then people just gradually work themselves back into the way they used to eat before, and the images of the animals that upset them so much, or even positive images, fade away compared to the here and now.
Great question. Great comment, John, and great comment, Karen, as well. So we're going to look to wrap up shortly. Are there any final questions before we wrap up? Final question before we wrap up. If anybody has any resources related to what we're talking about, feel free to pop those in the chat, as well as your IG handles if you'd like to share those so we can follow one another. We covered quite a lot. Carla, you have a question? You can unmute.
Oh.
And this will be the last question for today, okay. And then we'll wrap up. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, and one of the other concerns is the avian flu that has been so prevalent, and it's, and I'm really, concerned about, we're so concerned about it. How's it affecting turkeys? I mean, I've heard about chickens, how millions of chickens have been killed and because of it. And so is it affecting the turkey population too, or?
Totally. Yes. Yes. Millions of turkeys have been subjected to this, as you probably have heard of what's called VSD, ventilation shutdown plus, which has become like the go-to method of mass killing millions and millions of chickens, turkeys, ducks in factory farms, also in backyard flocks, and a couple of sanctuaries even had people coming in representing the government and killed their animals right there at their own sanctuaries. And this is, avian flu is caused by the poultry industry. Ducks and geese have had viruses in their systems forever, as we do ourselves. It was really when the poultry industry developed this mass concentration of birds who are very weak because of how they've been bred and how they're forced to live, basically in cesspools. They're living in filth. And then they're so weak from how they've been bred for just this one food trait at the expense of all their other bodily functions. So you've got a disease which has really been created by the poultry industry. And by the way, the poultry industry worldwide, it's in this country and worldwide, in this country, let's just talk about this country. In the United States, there is no incentive at all on the part of the poultry industry, the chicken industry, the turkey industry, et cetera. No incentive to do anything about avian flu, like cleaning up these filthy places these birds are living in. Not they could really be cleaned up, because you can't have thousands and thousands of creatures crammed into a single place. But the thing is, they don't care, because taxpayers pay for everything. Our taxes pay for them to kill all these birds and pigs, for example, to restock the chicken and turkey houses, to rebuild, clean out the houses as much as that can be done before they restock. So taxpayers are paying many millions of dollars, which is distributed, they're called indemnities, which are distributed through the US Department of Agriculture to all of these chicken and turkey and duck producers. So they don't have any incentive to do anything. They're going to get reimbursed. They'll probably actually make money on avian influenza. But this method that is being used to murder all of these birds who may or may not even have avian influenza, because they don't test every bird, they just kill them all, again, because they can just get money to bring them all back, the next group of live birds. But
Oh my God.
this method of killing them, called V, like Victor, VSD plus, is, first of all, they shut off all the ventilation, they shut off all the air in the buildings, and then they heat up the buildings to like 104, 105, whatever degrees. So these animals, birds and pigs, are heating up to an intolerable degree, and they can't breathe. And then sometimes they throw in some carbon dioxide along with it, and they can live for like more than a day, dying slowly in agony. And I'll just say this real quickly. One of the worst of all the things, it doesn't get worse than this. At North Carolina State University in 2016, the poultry science department there asked for money from the US Poultry Association for money to conduct these VSD experiments on individual hens at North Carolina State. And they got the money. And it just so happens that the organization Animal Outlook, their lawyer, Will Lowry, did a Freedom of Information Act request and got 10 hours of footage of watching these hens in these sealed compartments, but all open up, open to the extent that you could look in and watch them slowly die. They shut off all the sound so they couldn't hear their cries. And these researchers under this Ken Anderson, the head of the poultry science department there. They are drinking ice water and fanning themselves and watching this horrible, horrible death being inflicted on these hens. Each hen is in her own separate glass enclosed or plexiglass enclosed compartment, and dying. I mean, you see them. I mean, it's just so cruel, so psychopathic that you could do this. I won't go into too much of it right now. I'll just say this. We are now looking at, because we have gone over after the American Veterinary Medical Association, which is supposed to care about and protect animals, right? But see, they don't care about animals at all compared to their clients. And their main clients are Purdue, Tyson, Smithfield, all of the agribusiness corporations with whom they identify psychologically and in every other way, and also the whole animal, laboratory animal industry. So they have given an imprimatur, that is a seal of approval, on this method of shutting off all the air and then heating up the facility to this intolerable degree and slowly cooking, literally cooking and baking these animals to death. That is our American Veterinary Medical Association. And that is what these industries are doing. And that is what the kind of experiment that is being done at North Carolina State University, and no doubt other university as well. Because again, these universities can get money to do this kind of stuff from the industry, or they can get money from the taxpayers. So, I mean, really, we can all say this is so, all of this is so terrible. It's so sad. It's so bad. Imagine being an animal, a bird, or a poor little bird, or a pig, or anybody in these conditions, and they're never going to escape until they die. It cannot be exaggerated how bad it is. It just cannot be. And what people will do, what poultry scientists will do, and have been doing for many decades, do and redo, I mean, force molting them, starving them for 2 weeks. It just goes on and on. Endless debeaking experiments, endless experiments, every kind that you can imagine going on all the time. And again, much of it is being paid for out of our taxes.
Yeah. Thank you, Carla. That's definitely a big area. We appreciate that question. Okay, so I know we probably have lots more questions perhaps, but we're going to wrap up in the interest of time. Karen, do you have a couple of quick?
Well, I'll just say one thing. I think it's really important for us to, as was said by one of the questioners, I think it was John Bell, about we need to help people to get to see who these wonderful animals are in a sanctuary when they're liberated. And I have to tell you about a video that we just now put on our homepage. It's on the right-hand side. It's called Boo the Chicken, B-O-O. When my friend Mary Finelli, who runs Fishfield, the organization Fishfield, all about fish, vegan organization. When she sent me the Facebook page showing this wonderful video called Boo the Chicken, who was rescued from the, a chicken industry, who was being advertised on Craigslist, and somehow this wonderful couple adopted Boo. And they did this fabulous video of Boo the Chicken in their home. And you can see it right on our homepage at upc-online.org. It's upc-online.org. If you look on the right-hand side, just look at Boo the Chicken, click it on, and I want to share that with everybody forever, because you see this rooster named Boo. He is so lively and so loving, and he loves to peck on these different types of musical instruments they have in their home. And it's just charming. It is charming. And you see this personality of this bird. And of course, you see him being just loved and cherished by this couple. And it's just delightful. So I would say, if you want to pick up after all this sad stuff, I recommend that you go to our website at upc-online.org and click on Boo the Chicken on the right side of the homepage. And then secondly, we have so much information about turkeys, including a wonderful slideshow, which is called, as is this presentation, Chickens or Turkeys, Who Are They and Why Should We Care? It's a wonderful slideshow. It's got all kinds of information and photographs and things. And it's, you just go to upc-online.org, dash online, whatever, and then /turkeys, and you'll see our webpage with all this information about turkeys.
Great. I love that. That's a great way to end, Karen, because it gives us some hope and reminds us who we're fighting for. And so please go to Karen's website, do that right after this and check it out and share and donate. And let's continue to grow our community. So I'm going to wrap up with a couple of announcements before we go. So I'd like to announce a few upcoming workshops. On November 10th, we have Activism for Banning Horse Carriages. And on November 15th, we have Thinking Like an Animal. On November 22nd, we have Pressure Campaigns. On December 6th, we have Vegan Kid Activists. So we have more workshops to be announced all the time, but please check out our previous workshops, including 2 previous workshops from Karen on our YouTube channel. And again, please subscribe. I also would like to announce 2 2023 live events. The AAM Washington, D.C. Week of Action is taking place March 14th through 20th, 2023. And the Colorado Convergence is taking place in and around Denver. And those dates are June 24th through July 1st, 2023. And these are week-long back-to-back activism together. We gather together in those cities. So no experience required for either, but registration is required. So you'll find those events on our Facebook page and website, or just reach out to me or any other AAM mentor. So that wraps up another AAM workshop. Thank you, Karen, for your time and wisdom.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank everybody who's here. I'm so grateful to have you here. And
yes,
thank you. To be with you. Thank
everybody for being here and for all the tireless work you're doing, all the tireless work everybody is doing for the animals.
Right.
And again, if you're interested in becoming a mentor or mentee, reach out to any AM mentor, visit our website, animalactivismmentorship.com. Yeah. So until next time,